Hey, 42 here. Tennis is a sport enjoyed by millions around the world and attended in droves by the rich, the famous and the royals. However, it started life as a bunch of monks slapping some balls around with their hands. Not those kinds of balls, get your mind out of the gutter. When you think about it, sport is pretty dumb. Men or women devote their lives to the rare opportunity to compete over an utterly meaningless prize whilst following a set of ancient, arbitrary rules to the adoration of billions of fans around the world. However, some individuals excel at their sport to such an insane degree that it defies the absurdity of sport itself. These aren't your ordinary athletes. These are the athletes whose achievements are so remarkable that they make the efforts of their peers vanish into obscurity. But before we jump in, I have a confession to make. I'm not a man who loves sport. Truthfully, I rarely watch sport, and so making this video was a huge learning experience for myself, which I enjoyed immensely. But don't worry, I consulted others who actually know their striker from their centre-back. And yes, I know you all probably have your own favourite sports stars who you think definitely deserve a mention here, no questions asked. But unfortunately, I just can't make a video about every famous athlete in every sport. In the spirit of fairness, I'm going to highlight only those who did the absolute most to reshape, popularise and utterly dominate their chosen sport. Also, I decided to stick to sports that were 1. Popular and 2. Don't involve vehicles. This was for 2 reasons. The first is that nobody, not one person on the planet, cares who the best man in the world at curling is. I'm sure even he doesn't care. The second is that skillfully piloting a vehicle is very impressive, but it's a completely different ballgame than competing with just your body. And let's face it, if I did include vehicles, this entire video would just become a breakdown of the MotoGP and the Isle of Man TT and Rally, because those guys are out of their goddamn minds. Now, let's begin. Boxing may not be the most popular sport in the world, but it is able to compel people's attention like perhaps no other, especially when there's a once-in-a-generation clash of the titans, such as when Deontay Wilder recently attempted to tickle Tyson Fury to the ground, and he was having none of it. I guess when someone goes around beating the crap out of everyone, the world tends to take notice. Mike Tyson is a good example. He entered the scene and knocked his opponents out so viciously and decisively that humanity, without hesitation, decided he was the baddest man on the planet. But who is the greatest boxer of all time? This, it turns out, is a highly contentious topic, one debated by boxing experts all across the world. So, without hesitation, I'm going to barge in and offer my not-so-enlightened opinion. A lot of pundits believe that Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, was the greatest boxer of all time. Hell, he even called himself the greatest, and he has several astonishing feats to back this up. To name a few, he was the first to win the heavyweight championship of the world 3 times. He won 56 fights with 37 knockouts and suffered 5 losses. He had arguably the 2 most famous fights of all time against Joe Frazier and George Foreman. You know, the grill guy. He transcended his sport to become a global icon more than any other man prior or since. Well, save one man, but we'll get to him. He reinvented heavyweight boxing, fighting with speed, grace, and rhythm hitherto unseen at that weight class. He fought at a time when there was only one heavyweight champion at any time, and defeated all newcomers. He fought during the most talent-rich era in heavyweight boxing history. He is considered by some to be the most charismatic man who's ever lived. For almost everyone across the world, he is the living embodiment of a champion. But for all his staggering ability and showmanship, Ali wasn't the greatest. Sugar Ray Robinson was. Fighting from 1940 to 65, Robinson was such a dominant welterweight and middleweight fighter that he's literally the reason pound-for-pound rankings exist. Those being where sports writers compare the abilities of fights across different weight classes. Let's just look at the facts, and please consider that all of these are true. When Robinson was an amateur, he won 85 fights and suffered no losses. Yes, an 85 winning streak, 69 of which were knockouts, 40 of which were in the first round. But it gets better. In his professional career, which started when he was 19, he had a record of 173 wins with 109 knockouts. He had a 91 fight winning streak. He held both the World Welterweight title and World Middleweight title, winning the latter multiple times. He was the first boxer in history to win a divisional championship 5 times. So in short, he beat the living crap out of a lot of people across multiple weight classes. Robinson had complete mastery of his sport. His technical proficiency as a fighter is regarded by modern critics to be perfect. He could fight as a brawler, a counterpuncher, or on the outside with his jab, all with unrivaled speed and accuracy. Describing his own style, he said, "Rhythm is everything in boxing, and every move you make starts with your heart, and that's in rhythm or you're in trouble. And you don't think, it's all instinct. If you stop to think, you're gone." He was outrageously confident. When he met George Costner in the middle of the ring, he said, "We better touch gloves because this is the only round." He then proceeded to knock Costner out in 2 minutes and 49 seconds. He once saw an incredibly attractive woman by the pool and, wondering how to spark up a conversation, decided to push her in. She later became his wife. Ali himself once hailed Robinson as "the king, my master, my idol," a sentiment repeated by Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Roberto Duran, all contenders for the title of greatest. Robinson once dreamed that he was going to kill his opponent, Jimmy Doyle, in the ring, a dream that led him to back out of the fight before being convinced to return by a priest. Doyle died after being knocked out in the 8th round. When he learned Doyle had planned to use his winnings to buy his mother a home, Robinson sacrificed his purse for the next 4 fights to fulfill the dead man's wishes. Unsurprisingly, in all of those pound-for-pound rankings, Robinson is almost always considered the best, and rightfully so. Now, basketball may be the most uniquely competitive sport on the planet. You have to be unnaturally tall, capable of jumping absurdly high, have outrageous fitness, unfaltering accuracy, and capable of replicating that day in, day out across 82 games in a season, all against a melting pot of outstanding, hand-picked, cultivated talent. But who amongst all that talent dominates all others? Now, I know what you're thinking. You already know the answer, especially if you've been watching The Last Dance on Netflix. It's his airness himself, Michael Jordan. Probably the only athlete to rival Ali's fame, Michael Jordan is widely regarded as the greatest basketball player of all time by other great players as well as journalists and coaches. Not just for his ability to fly like Superman through the air, but because he was an incredible defender, playmaker, and shooter. He's widely regarded as the best North American athlete of all time. He's a marketer's wet dream and helped solidify Nike as the brand it is today. He was so competitive that when he retired, he walked right into a Major League Baseball team as if that was just a normal thing to do. He's a 6-time NBA Final MVP, 6-time NBA champion including 2 three-peats, and has 10 All-NBA first-team designations. Oh, and he's also a 2-time gold-winning Olympian. He even has his own crying meme. But whilst he's the greatest, many would argue that pedestal is shared with one other man, Phil Jackson. Jackson is a 2-time NBA champion as a player, and an 11-time NBA champion as a coach, both with the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers, making a world record total of 13 as both player and coach. Sure, there are much better players on paper, but Jackson's achievements are astonishing. Because good players rarely become good coaches, and a cursory glance at sports will show you good coaches are never good players. Jackson is the exception to this and easily one of the greatest coaches of all time. He combined Native American spiritualism with Zen and perfected the triangle offense to form a coaching ethos and strategy that underpinned his success, helping him shepherd legendary players like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and none other than Michael Jordan himself. In fact, both men's legacies and rise to all-time greatness are highly dependent on one another. Jordan and Jackson were both reliant on their tenure with the Chicago Bulls and 2 NBA champion three-peats to solidify their legacies. But Jordan couldn't have done it without Jackson's unique and dogged coaching style, and Jackson couldn't have done it without Jordan's ability to single-handedly dominate and win games by himself. That is why both are the greatest basketball players of all time. Now, when all you need is a ball and 2 feet, it's no wonder why football has grown to be the world's most popular sport. Kids learn to play it on the street, on the beach, at the park, and carry the game and their love of it with them their entire lives. It's a sport that defines entire nations and their culture. Football is so popular that for the 2018 World Cup, 3.572 billion people tuned in to watch. That's over half the world's population. And in a sport as popular as this, the level of skill and competition faced at the top is second to none. Put simply, to be great at football, you have to be exceptional and a once-in-a-generation talent. That's why the best footballers get paid millions every year to kick around a dead cow. And there is one Brazilian man who's commonly called the king of football by both players and fans all over the world. That man is Pele. Pele is widely regarded, even amongst modern greats like Messi and Ronaldo, to be the greatest footballer to ever lace up the boots, and his achievements are testament to this. He won 3 World Cups, he was voted World Player of the Century, he's the most successful domestic league goal scorer in football history, scoring 650 goals in 694 league matches, and he holds a Guinness World Record for 1,281 goals in 1,363 games, including unofficial friendlies. That's an incredible amount of times commenters had to scream unintelligible noises down a microphone. He's also had, if legends are to be believed, an equal number of affairs. You also know you're great when you're known by one word. Just ask Prince or Jesus. Pele started playing for the Brazilian national team at age 16, and from then on averaged almost a goal a game. He was an incredible playmaker who could strike from any foot, and was a blend of all the other great players throughout history. He led like Zidane, shot like Ronaldo, dribbled like Nazario. He had it all. You know how people say Superman has everyone else's powers? Well, that describes Pele in real life. His ability to finish was merciless, and it was backed up with an unrivaled level of pace and balance, as well as an explosive attack and defensive intelligence. People would travel from all over the world just to catch a glimpse of him playing, and his creative, unpredictable nature always put on a good show. Former Manchester United striker and World Cup winner Sir Bobby Charlton said of him, "I sometimes feel as though football was invented for this magical player." And Manchester United defender Paddy Crerand stated that Pele's name was spelt G-O-D. And in his own words, Pele said, "There will only be one Pele, there won't be anyone else like me." I don't think there will. And due to football's overwhelming popularity, you could make a compelling argument as to why Pele may just be the greatest sportsman of all time. But in the spirit of fairness, I'd like to present another option, because being the most popular doesn't necessarily make something the greatest. You see, as beautiful a game as football is, there's another sport which makes it look rather timid. A sport that also involves an albeit oddly shaped ball running from one end to the other, and teams of over 10 men competing to score points. But unlike football, these men run at each other full pelt, smash into one another like human battering rams, and then stamp each other into the dirt. Oh, and they occasionally grope each other's bottoms. Also, many games begin with a blood-crazed war dance. In fact, this sport requires a bit of all the other sports in this video combined. The brutality, violence, and physicality of boxing, the hand-eye coordination and accuracy of basketball, and the coordinated team elegance of football. I'm speaking, of course, of rugby. Possibly the most physically demanding sport on earth. It's a sport that requires power, endurance, skill, tactical nuance, and mental resilience, all whilst being smashed to pieces by 15 110 kilogram men with dodgy earlobes. It requires immense reserves of anaerobic and aerobic fitness, whilst putting players' bodies under tremendous amounts of stress. Concussions, bloody injuries, and torn ligaments are not uncommon. One player even had his scrotum torn open. Ouch. Others have died. And this is no surprise. Just ask one of your friends, even if he's moderately sized, to tackle you as hard as he can. Now imagine doing that for a living, over and over and over again, week in, week out. There's a reason American footballers wear body armour. Rugby players have no such luxury. Their body armour is being a 6-foot hairy Scottish man who's built like a brick shithouse. And although there have been efforts to make the sport as safe as possible, it is still inherently violent and prone to injury. Though I will say, off pitch, rugby players are remarkably gentlemanlike, and their sportsmanship and camaraderie is one of the greatest of any sport. It might not be as popular as football, but to be remarkable in a sport like rugby, you have to be about as complete an athlete as humanly possible. With this in mind, you'd think that being the greatest fly half who ever lived, the highest point scorer in rugby history, a dashing underwear model, and all-around great guy, Dan Carter would be a shoo-in for the greatest rugby player of all time. But he's not. And there are certainly some England and Wales players who could contend for this accolade. But no, we're going to stay in New Zealand. Because the title of greatest goes to Richie McCaw. Growing up in a small valley in the South Island of New Zealand, Richie spent his time racing around a big farm, playing rugby, doing chores, and running up mountains, as you do. During this time, he set himself a humble goal, the kind of goal any kid sets, to be an All Black, but not just any All Black, a great one. The All Blacks, if you don't know, are New Zealand's famous national rugby team. Notorious for their exceptional winning record, relentless style of play, and the intimidating / slightly silly haka war dance performed at the start of each match. To become an All Black in a rugby-mad country like New Zealand is no easy feat. To become a great one is close to impossible. But Richie achieved it. He didn't just become a great All Black, he became the greatest All Black who ever lived. And not only that, he became their greatest flanker and their greatest captain too. Here's a breakdown of what he achieved. At 148 test matches, he is the most capped rugby player of all time. He won 131 out of 148 tests, coming in at an 88 to 89% win percentage. Only 6 men have had more caps than he has wins. Without him, the All Blacks had a winning percentage of 68%. That's a 20% increase in win chance just from him being on the field. In RPG terms, that's a plus 20% DPS increase for your entire raid team. A very good buff. He captained his nation to 2 back-to-back World Cup wins, something no other captain or other nation has ever done. He's the first All Black to ever reach 100 test matches. He's the first rugby union player to win 100 tests. He won the Bledisloe Cup 10 times, won the Tri-Nations 4 times, and the Rugby Championship 3 times. He was 20 years old when he first played for the All Blacks, was widely criticised as too young, but won Man of the Match in his first game, shutting everyone up. He played 61 games on New Zealand soil and only lost twice. The Rugby World Cup website has him number 1 on all-time tackles at 225. He is the highest scoring forward in New Zealand history, 135 points. For those of you that don't know, forwards don't typically score. He won Rugby Player of the Year 3 times, a feat rivalled only by Dan Carter, but McCaw won it 2 consecutive years. He's only ever lost to 4 teams: Australia, South Africa, England and France. He's been in the game for so long that over 130 players made their All Black debut whilst he was playing. And he did all of this in arguably the most violent mainstream sport in the world. whilst playing in its most violent position. In fact, to understand what Ritchie accomplished, you really have to understand what a flanker's role in a rugby match consists of. Quite simply, a flanker has to tackle the ever-loving shit out of people, withstand a barrage of players smashing into you, and steal the ball. That's pretty much it. Flankers compete in rucks and mauls, and they do this over and over and over again for 80 minutes of violence. It's not a position that supports player longevity, and it's not a position many players have the physicality to play in. In the words of World Cup winning coach Steve Hansen, "Ritchie is the best All Black we've ever had. Ritchie has played 148 matches at flanker, which is unheard of. You put your body on the line every time you play there." Ritchie had an enormous influence on the game, making the breakdown, where the ball is in a ruck, being one of, if not the most important elements of a rugby game. This change happened because of just how good he was at stealing the ball. He was so good at it that he regularly became the target of foul play. But he never responded in kind, only ever striking someone once, which is when he defended the ref, who was being attacked by a spectator. Richard had an almost preternatural ability to read where the ball was going to be and teleport himself to that exact location, then smash the player that had it into oblivion. Alongside this, he was a born leader of men, putting in a peerless work rate on the pitch that inspired and led his team through example, and engaging clearly with the referees, winning them over to his side, and testing what he could and could not get away with, always looking for that competitive edge. And to cap things off, his last ever rugby match was winning the Rugby World Cup final at Twickenham. Not a bad fairy tale finish for the greatest rugby player of all time. And by extension, when considering the greatest sportsman of all time, one who excelled at all forms of athleticism, fitness, skill, ingenuity, and leadership. He'd be my pick. But who'd be yours? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me. You can do that by either joining the 42 Club here on YouTube by clicking the join button below, or heading on over to Patreon.